Hello, it's Mike Wazowski. How are you from Dimensional Walking, which is a paranormal journey. So today, let's talk about what we're going to do today. We are going to look at the Montauk Project and the synchronicities that I have had over my lifetime. It was very intense for about 10 years, from the mid-90s to the mid-2000s. And so we'll go through some of that. First of all, I like to just start by saying that hopefully you know a little bit about Montauk. I'll give you a little bit of a background, but I want to just let you know that I feel that much of what you probably heard from Montauk is probably true to some degree. There's a lot of truths out there. I think there's a lot of course, fiction out there about it. Like everything, a story starts out with a little truth and then it's added on, subtracted, divided. So again, I personally believe that there is, because I've had a lot of interesting synchronicities that I'm going to share with you. And we'll go from there. So first of all, let me just kind of look. I'll talk to you about a little bit of background to get you caught up and give you a little idea if you don't know what Montauk is. So in the middle 80s, three guys, two of them knew each other and the other one didn't at the time anyways. Eventually they talked to each other as time went on. One guy was named Preston Nichols, other one was Peter Moon and Stuart Surdlow. And these guys lived out in the northeastern part of the United States. And around the early 80s, they started circulating some stories about an alleged military base, air base, at the end of Long Island on Montauk Point. That's hence the name Montauk Project. And what they alleged was there was this project, a military government project in this military base. Now the base on top was an air base, and underneath is where all the action happened as far as this goes. What they said was there was teleportation things going on there. There was time travel. There was mind control. There was alien contact being made. There was even some cryptic. There was like also they seemed to, through the portals that were created from the time travel, things would start coming through, good things, bad things. There was this kind of famous Montauk, Bigfoot, Sasquatch type looking creature that came through, and they actually had gotten some pictures of it. So there was a lot of strange activity going on in Montauk. There's a little bit of other backstory I'm going to tell you real quickly. Montauk apparently is a point, a vortex type point. It's kind of on maybe the edge of Atlantis. And it seems that there's also rumors that there was little pyramids that are in the beach right there off of the base, etc. I don't know too much about that. I just heard. I think it was actually in one of the books. But anyways, something very strange is going on there. I think there was also stories about the Montauk Indians, thought it was a very sacred place. Obviously, before the military built their base there, I don't know if the military knew it was a sacred place, but they still built it there anyways. So there may have been some very special energy going on here, and that may have contributed to the ability to do the time travel and some of the other strange things that were happening on Montauk Point, hence the base. So as time went on, in the 80s, these three people, Stuart, Peter, and Preston, they wrote some books about it. Okay, it's a series of books, a wonderful series of books. And you know, you can take them as fiction, you can take them as nonfiction. I believe they're more nonfiction and fiction. But even if you just take them as fiction, they're just great. They're great stories, amazing possibilities, okay? And I think that's what you want to hook into. The possibilities are there. So anyways, so time went on. Oh, and one more thing I want to mention. There was also a connection, a possible connection between Montauk and the Philadelphia experiment, okay? And I'll talk about that a little later, but there's connections there between the Tesla technology and what was going on in Montauk. So, and it kind of connected at one point, interesting enough. So let's talk about my synchronicities with Montauk, okay? So in the middle 90s, at that point, before this all started, I knew absolutely nothing about Montauk, nothing. Even though up until that point, probably, I guess I would have been, let's see, I would have been in my 40s. I had been, you know, in the paranormal world, Sasquatch, UFOs, all that stuff for probably 40 years. I never heard of Montauk, which is strange. I probably should have, but I never did. But anyways, something kind of big happened, and it jumped out at me, and I'll tell you why. Happened to be up at Mt Shasta in California, beautiful mountain. Went up there and meditated on the side of the mountain, and it was really wonderful. And I seemed to make some connections with, you know, some entities maybe in the mountain, etc. And that's kind of a whole nother story. But anyways, I meditated there for probably an hour or so, came back down the mountain, went to the delightful little town, Mt Shasta. And there, besides eating, you know, lunch or whatever, I went to a little bookstore. It was like a metaphysical bookstore, but it had regular kind of books. And in this case, it had, you know, kind of paranormal type books, etc. And I was there, and literally, I will tell you, book jumped right off the shelf. I mean, literally jumped off the shelf. I'd never had this happen before. You know, I caught it. I mean, I don't necessarily think it was intending to landing in my hands, but I had to catch it. So I caught it. And it was the first in this series of the Montauk books. I think it was Preston Nichols who wrote the first one. And anyways, the name of it was Montauk Experiment in Time. It's a great book. It kind of starts and gives you the introduction to Montauk, and it moves on. And then there's bits and pieces in the rest of the books. Anyways, it was a great book. I sat down there right in the bookstore and read probably, 30% of it or something. And then, I said, well, I probably just need to buy this and take it back to my hotel room and read some more, etc. Anyways, I read it, took it home, really kind of got into it, started doing my own research. And then, of course, eventually, I bought some more books. I bought the rest of the series, okay? At that point, I was probably living in Atlanta, if I remember correctly. And then eventually I moved from Atlanta to Tucson. So I was in Tucson, and I think it was like after I probably was working on my third book. And so I went to the bookstore in Tucson I think it was a Barnes and Noble. And I went to pick up the book. And strange things, again, keeps on happening. And I bought the book, I walked outside, and I had a feeling something was up in the sky. So I looked up in the sky, and there was a huge UFO up there. And it was interesting, people were passing by. I'm standing there, kind of looking stupid up at the sky. Nobody seems to care I'm looking up in the sky, but there was this UFO. And I swear it just told me one thing. It just said truth. That's all it says, just truth. And I said, okay, great. And then, the UFO basically disappeared at that point, and I went home. Okay. So then another thing happened while I lived in Tucson. We had something called crystal balls. I don't know. Some of you probably know what a crystal ball is. Very cool. And you play them basically. You use I don't remember what they call it, but like a small instrument. It's made usually cloth, a stick kind of wrapped in cloth, and you spin it around it inside of it, and it's a bowl, and it's made out of crystal, so it gives off some amazing high pitch, different pitch sounds. It's really wonderful. So you get about different size ones, and you play them, and it's really cool. The only problem you have if you have animals or dogs, especially dogs, they don't like it. So typically you either have to leave them outside or you got to put them in another room. And even if they're in another room, typically they start howling. So you have a feeling they don't like it, okay? So anyways, we used to play these crystal bowls. You know, we just play them. A couple of times I played them, I remember after I read stuff in the book. I don't know why I remember that, but I'll tell you why I kind of remember that. So we decided to leave there, and we ended up, I ended up going up to Utah to work at the Olympics. So anyways, when we were leaving to go to the Olympics, my neighbor next door came out, and I didn't really talk to this guy very much. And he said, "Oh, you're leaving, you know, good luck," and blah, blah, blah. He said, "But I have to tell you one thing. Twice when you were here, I know," he said, "I know you're here because the car were here. There was UFOs over your house." And I said to him, "Wow, really?" And I said, I kind of said, "Okay, well, that's not unusual." And then I thought to myself, maybe it was when we were playing the crystal balls, and it probably was. And he said it was twice. And going back and thinking, I was trying to put it all together. I also was reading Montauk. So a little bit of a synchronicity there, maybe, maybe not, don't know. I mean, the whole UFO thing with the crystal balls is pretty cool. Anyway, so that was that. So that was kind of what all went on in Tucson related to Montauk. So from there, went up to Utah. And so in Utah, what happened there is, oh, let me back up again. I forgot one more synchronicity in Tucson. So in Tucson, I did some research again about Montauk related stuff. And I found out that there was a scientist that worked on both at Montauk and in the Philadelphia experiment. And the scientist happened to have a daughter, and I can tell you her first name. Her name was Helga. And she lived in Tucson. She was a little bit into the metaphysical world. And her father, the scientist, had died years before. But I contacted her and went to see her. And she was a wonderful person. And she was very much into mainly the Philadelphia experiment, but she also was aware of Montauk. And so we talked about that and talked about both, more the Philadelphia experiment. And she gave me some, whatever little background she could give me about her father and what she understood the Philadelphia experiment to be, and how he was involved with what she called the Tesla technology that really made that whole experiment go. And she confirmed some of the stuff that she heard from her father. She said she didn't witness any of this. It was really what came directly from her father. So that was another synchronicity, I thought, anyways. So, okay, from there, I went to Utah. So in Utah, there was a couple things that went on. Number one, I hooked up, did some more research, and I hooked up with some of the players, some of the other players that were involved. I was able to get a hold of Preston Nichols and Peter Moon. Talked to them on the phone a couple of times each, and they were very nice gentlemen, and felt, when I was talking to them, they felt very credible, and they told me their stories and how they felt they were connected with Montauk, and that I think it was Preston felt that he was, had, kind of this second life, and he was mind controlled by the military, and how he worked he worked at Montauk and various parts of that project. And Peter Moon, he was more of a researcher, if I remember correctly. So anyway, so I got to talk to them. I thought that was really cool. And then I also got a hold of a person and met a person called Alexander Bruce. She's a very interesting person, very lovely. she's an author. She's a researcher. She has a great website. I think it's called Forbidden Knowledge TV. And she's great. And she also wrote a book called Murders in Philadelphia, which is fictional, but I think, as she told me, it's derived on some of her research. Dealt primarily with the Philadelphia experiment, and there's some conversation about Montauk in the mix also. So anyways, that was pretty synchronistic. I was able to get a hold of all these people, talk to them, et cetera, et cetera. So then the last thing I did, and when I lived in Utah, was I was able to get a hold of my dear, a friend of mine, a good friend of mine in Atlanta. She ran a UFO forum in Atlanta, and I would go to it for years and years. It was kind of one of my first formal dips in the world of UFOs, and we would, I'd kind of help her a little bit, and she would bring in speakers from all over the world. Very, very, very amazing speakers. So anyways, so we were just catching up, etc. And I don't know how I brought it up. I was she may have been asking me what I was into, and I said, hey, I got in this whole Montauk thing. It was, it's pretty amazing, and she knew about Montauk, etc. And she says, you ain't gonna believe this, but I've been dating, at least I was dating, Cameron Duncan. Well, for you enthusiasts, fans of Montauk, you know who Cameron Duncan is, right? So he was Al Bielek's brother, or stepbrother, I believe. And Al Bielek, we'll talk about Al Bielek in a minute, but Cameron Duncan was supposedly Cameron Duncan worked on the Philadelphia experiment with his brother, Al Bielek. But he was also involved in the Montauk, because he was involved in Montauk because what he did is he was one of the guys that went on the time machine. And it was amazing, absolutely blew my mind away that she was dating him, because there's a couple of reasons. First of all, this whole Montauk time machine happened in the 40s, and maybe the early 50s at the latest. And he was in his 30s at that time, if I remember correctly. So he would have been in his 80s or close to 90 at that time. And I don't think knowing my friend, she would have been dating somebody that old, but it's possible. So I kind of left it go. But I did question her on it, and she said, no, this Cameron Duncan, who supposedly told me stories about being in the time machine and all this stuff, this guy was a legit, but he was only maybe in his 40s at the latest. But he did tell her something, that he said it seemed like because he went in this time machine, he didn't age, or he aged a whole lot different pace than anybody else did. So I thought that was pretty amazing. And anyway, she gave me some more detail. A lot of it seemed to match up what was in the book. It was nice confirmation. She said that they weren't dating anymore. He had moved back, I think she said to North Carolina, and she hadn't heard from him in quite a while. But I thought that was an amazing synchronicity, that an old friend of mine would date this guy that was involved in both Montauk and the Philadelphia experiment. So that was crazy, crazy. So anyways, that was Utah. When I lived up there, those are the things that were happening that were synchronistic to the Montauk project. So then I moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico. And so Albuquerque was really interesting. As I said before, I helped develop and ran the UFO Paranormal Forum, which was a very successful, one of the larger paranormal groups in the United States. And I did that for about 8 years. And during that, I met all kinds of people doing all kinds of stuff. Some people knew of Montauk, etc. But there was probably one person, and I won't give names, but I met that she ended up being a therapist for some of the Montauk boys. Okay, so who are the Montauk boys? So the Montauk boys are some of these people, some of these men, or boys, I guess they were boys more than men, that were somehow gathered up. Some of them had, very poor backgrounds. They had, maybe they were orphans or whatever. A lot of them came from the New York area. And they were put on the time machine. They were literally kind of put on there. It seems somewhat abusive, but they were put on this time machine. And of course, they were kind of, I don't want to say screwed up, but screwed up is probably a good term. So they needed a lot of help when they got back to guess this reality, and this person helped these people. So I thought that was pretty incredible that I had met that person. So anyways, also in Albuquerque, I had the great opportunity to meet Al Bielek. I did about a 4-hour discussion at a kind of a movie party. He was making a movie in the Albuquerque area. And so I got to sit down with him and ask him a billion questions, as many as I could. It turned out it was like a 4-hour, I considered a 4-hour interview. I mean, other people were asking questions, but he would answer any question you want. He was incredible, actually. Never forget that experience. He talked about, I'll give you a couple of little side inference stuff. He talked about cell phone towers. He claims that he helped the military in the 50s develop cell phones and cell phone towers. He told me how dangerous they are. He said as the technology would grow, and of course, I was talking to him, oh Jesus, I guess this would have been in the mid 2000s. And he says the cell phone grew, the technology grew, they would be able to read your mind. Meaning you put your cell phone up to your head and they could read what was in your mind. He's probably going to be right. He said they're very dangerous. He said cell phone towers and the phones themselves are dangerous to humans. So anyways, so he's a very intelligent guy. Of course, he was one of the men with some other scientists that helped develop the Philadelphia experiment, the Tesla technology to basically portal or actually vortex a ship from a point close to Philadelphia to another port in Virginia. So he was part of that experiment. And he did give me some detail. He said him and his stepbrother, Cameron Duncan, were working together on the project. They were on the boat when they were going to teleport this ship. Or actually, I guess the whole deal was the initial thing was make it invisible. That's what their purpose was. It wasn't necessary to make it transported anywhere. That wasn't what they wanted to do. They want to make it completely invisible. So apparently what happened was the experiment went haywire, basically, and things started going crazy. He claims that they both had a relative that was also on the ship. I think he was a naval hand that was on the ship. And when this thing dematerialized or started to, it actually materialized back, and people that were moving around actually got their arms and their legs and bodies stuck inside the hull of the ship and basically died when it materialized again. It didn't go to the end of the experiment, is my point. So anyways, for some reason, him and his brother realized something was going wrong, and they jumped overboard thinking that would help them. Well, what he told me is they jumped overboard, but they never hit the water. Basically what they hit is some portal, and they were transported to Montauk. So he always speculated that Montauk had something that ended up doing something to cause this thing maybe to go haywire. He never seemed to conclude that was the case, but he ended up there. He ended up on the floor there. Him and Duncan were both together because they jumped off. He never said if anybody else tried to jump off, if they ended up in Montauk. I guess I should have asked that question. He may have told me. But anyway, so he's in Montauk. He doesn't know how he got there. They're questioning him. he can't figure anything out. Cameron doesn't either. Eventually, apparently Cameron stays there and works with them and eventually does the time machine thing, et cetera, et cetera. And the rest is kind of has to do with Montauk more than it does with the Philadelphia experiment. Um, uh, Al Bielek, he goes on, does some other work with the military and various other things, claims that he's gone to Mars, claims that he's gone to the moon, told some pretty amazing stories about that and how he got back and forth, how he was teleported or jump roomed to those locations. And you could ask him any question you could think of, and he always had some type of answer. Now, was it true? I don't know, but the answers are pretty amazing. Just the answers were just amazing. So that was another synchronistic thing about Montauk, Philadelphia experiment that I don't think too many people have had this opportunity to talk to Al Bielek. So anyways, that's the Al Bielek story and what happened in Albuquerque. So anyways, that basically is my synchronicities up to this point. Now, like I said, I do get dreams. I've had dreams since the middle 2000s. And I've had flashbacks since the middle 2000s that are, they're very quick. They're very glimpses. I could be in the middle of a dream, a normal dream, and all of a sudden something about Montauk would come up, or I'd be, maybe even doing something and something would pop up and, would remind me of something, or I'd see something and then it just would kind of fade away. So most of the time, they're not very long episodes, but it's pretty incredible. The Montauk thing is very incredible. If you get a chance, read the books. There's a series of books, and they connect a lot of things. UFOs, paranormal, music. Oh my gosh, it goes on and on and on. They're just showing how paranormal things, UFOs, and all, there is so much connection with us here on Earth. And I think you'd enjoy it, fiction or nonfiction. But anyways, that's it. That's it. That is my Montauk. It is something I will never forget. I will never forget my synchronicities I've had. And, tomorrow I could have another one. I'm sure I will. But anyways, especially since I did this, because it seems like a lot of times when I start talking about it or doing something, something happens. Somebody else will come to me and talk to me or relate a story they have about Montauk or even the Philadelphia experiment, because I think they're pretty well tied together somehow at the hip, I suppose. So anyways, again, this is Mike from Dimensional Walking. Our other website is True Seeker Forum. If you need to get a hold of us, ask us all kinds of questions. We'll get back to you. Go to dimensionalwalking@gmail.com and we will get back to you. Hey, listen, be safe, be happy, and hey, we love you, and you take it easy. Love you. Bye.